I'm going to be talking about the role of structure for Jerome Bruner, drawing from his book, The Process of Education. And this is my copy. I'm fortunate enough to have a signed copy from Mr. Bruner himself, Dr. Bruner himself. I'll be reading sections from the introduction in this video, and I'm also going to read from the preface that gives a little bit of context for this book. So this is from the preface. In September 1959, there gathered at Woods Hole on Cape Cod some 35 scientists, scholars, and educators to discuss how education in science might be improved in our primary and secondary schools. The 10-day meeting had been called by the National Academy of Sciences, which, through its education committee, had been examining for several years the long-range problem of improving the dissemination of scientific knowledge in America. The intention was not to institute a crash program, but rather to examine the fundamental processes involved in imparting to young students a sense of the substance and method of science. Nor was the objective to recruit able young Americans to scientific careers, desirable though such an outcome might be. Rather, what had prompted the meeting was a conviction that we were at the beginning of a period of new progress in and concern for creating curricula and ways of teaching science, and that a general appraisal of this progress and concern was in order, so as to better guide developments in the future. So this conference, the Woods Hole Conference, brought together all stars from a lot of different fields, organized in different groups, but with this focus on how to improve scientific curriculum, especially in the primary and secondary schools in America. And this book, The Process of Education, is like Jerome Bruner's conclusions from that conference, like trying to crystallize, okay, here are the lessons we've learned. And one of the big lessons is the importance of structure. So now I'm going to turn to, I'll be reading from the introduction, passages tied to his findings, what his conclusions were about the role of structure. So this is from the introduction. The main objective of this work has been to present subject matter effectively, that is, with due regard not only for coverage, but also for structure. Physicists, biologists, mathematicians, historians, educators, and psychologists came together to consider anew the nature of the learning process, its relevance to education, and points at which current curricular efforts have raised new questions about our conceptions of learning and teaching. What shall be taught, when, and how? What kinds of research and inquiry might further the growing effort in the design of curricula? What are the implications of emphasizing the structure of a subject, be it mathematics or history, emphasizing it in a way that seeks to give a student as quickly as possible a sense of the fundamental ideas of a discipline? There are a few sentences or passages that I'll be reading that crystallize in some way what he's getting at with the role of structure. And this is one such passage. What are the implications of emphasizing the structure of a subject, be it mathematics or history, emphasizing it in a way that seeks to give a student as quickly as possible a sense of the fundamental ideas of a discipline? So, and he says as quickly as possible, and that also means as early as possible. And according to a student's understanding, give them a sense of the fundamental ideas of a discipline that can serve them in the future. The past half century, continuing now, the past half century has witnessed the rise of the American University Graduate School with its strong emphasis upon advanced study and research. And we're familiar with that today, that the what professors are kind of graded on or evaluated on is their publications. Their publications that kind of move the field forward, challenge the discipline in some way. One consequence of this development has been the growing separation of first-rank scholars and scientists from the task of presenting their own subjects in primary and secondary schools. Indeed, even in elementary courses for undergraduates. So we have these professors and graduate students, so these are people in advanced programs on the cutting edge of their discipline, but they're mostly talking with each other at conferences or in courses in graduate school. They're not talking to high school students or elementary students, or even, as he suggests, undergraduate students. The chief contact between those on the frontiers of scholarship and students in schools was through the occasional textbooks for high schools prepared by such distinguished scientists as Millikan, or by historians of the stature of Beard or Comacher. For the most part, however, the scholars at the forefront of their disciplines, those who might be able to make the greatest contribution to the substantive reorganization of their fields, were not involved in the development of curricula for the elementary and secondary schools. In consequence, school programs have often dealt inadequately or incorrectly with contemporary knowledge, and we have not reaped the benefits that might have come from a joining of the efforts of eminent scholars, wise and skillful teachers, and those trained in the fields related to teaching and learning. Now there appears to be a reversal of this trend. It consists in the renewed involvement of many of America's most distinguished scientists in the planning of school study programs in their field, in the preparation of textbooks and laboratory demonstrations, in the construction of films and television programs. So Bruner is saying there was a trend where professors and graduate school students, they were on the cutting edge of the discipline, but they weren't really connecting or communicating with elementary students, secondary students, or even undergraduate students, but that trend seemed to be reversing recently. We can still feel the effects of kind of the organization of graduate school compared to other levels of education. And today we have preeminent scholars who are trying to communicate to a wider audience, not just to other professors in the field or graduate students. So I think of like Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief Introduction to Time, that is not aimed at other professors in physics, but aimed at a more general audience, but also not presenting the information in an inaccurate way. It may not be as technical as he would present at a conference with his colleagues, but it's not inaccurate. It's just tuned to a different audience. Continuing on. A word is needed at this point to explain in fuller detail what is meant by the structure of a subject, for we shall have occasion to return to this idea often in later pages. Grasping the structure of a subject is understanding it in a way that permits many other things to be related to it meaningfully. To learn structure, in short, is to learn how things are related. So this is another one of those sentences, or a couple sentences that pack a lot. Grasping the structure of a subject is understanding it in a way that permits many other things to be related to it meaningfully. To learn structure, in short, is to learn how things are related. So you can imagine if you have a sense for a heliocentric model of the galaxy, then that helps you understand. In that way, you can understand or make sense of a lot of different relations, like how certain planets go on certain paths and how stars behave differently from planets. So again, to learn structure, in short, is to learn how things are related. So if we have a sense for the structure of the galaxy, then we can see how the different aspects relate to each other. I think the example of the structure of the galaxy is also a way to think about his earlier claim about kind of the separation of the experts on the cutting edge and elementary schools and secondary schools. That if you imagine back to a time when the astronomers on the cutting edge who were discovering that, oh, actually our model needs to be a heliocentric model instead of an Earth-centric model, that if that person is only communicating, if that person who's doing that research is only communicating with their contemporaries or graduate students, and it's not getting down to the secondary and elementary levels, then what they're learning at the elementary and secondary levels is just going to be misinformation that needs to be corrected later. So you can see in that example, if on the one hand, if we have the experts who have discovered, okay, the sun is the center of the galaxy, not the Earth, if they're making that discovery, but that discovery and that finding, that knowledge isn't getting communicated at the elementary and the secondary levels or the undergraduate levels, it's only being communicated among graduate students and fellow professors, then we're losing out a lot on the effectiveness and the continuity of the education. That basically all these people who are growing up with a bad model of the universe or of the galaxy, when they get to graduate school, now they have to switch and learn something new and something that is opposed to what they've learned before. And what Bruner is saying is we need to have those people on the frontier of the field, make sure that their findings are getting communicated all the way down, so that we don't have that. And he doesn't talk about the different models of the galaxy. I just think that's a kind of explicit model that we're familiar with, this radical changing of perspectives of the structure of the galaxy. And you can imagine what kind of waste and what kind of problems we would have if those findings about the more accurate findings about the structure of the galaxy didn't get communicated to the lower levels of education. So again, grasping the structure of a subject is understanding it in a way that permits many other things to be related to it meaningfully. To learn structure, in short, is to learn how things are related. So now he's going to give an example from math. Much more briefly, to take an example from mathematics, algebra is a way of arranging knowns and unknowns in equations so that the unknowns are made knowable. The three fundamentals involved in working with these equations are commutation, distribution, and association. Once a student grasps the ideas embodied by these three fundamentals, he's in a position to recognize wherein new equations to be solved are not new at all, but variants on a familiar theme. And this is an advantage of that structure, that new problems become variants because you've got this structure to work with. You've got this structure to help you understand how things are related. Whether the student knows the formal names of these operations is less important for transfer than whether he is able to use them. The often unconscious nature of learning structures is perhaps best illustrated in learning one's native language. So here's an example in learning a language. Having grasped the subtle structure of a sentence, the child very rapidly learns to generate many other sentences based on this model, though different in content from the original sentence learned. And having mastered the rules for transforming sentences without altering their meaning, the dog bit the man, and the man was bitten by the dog, the child is able to vary his sentences much more widely. Yet, while young children are able to use the structural rules of English, they are certainly not able to say what the rules are. So this gets into another big part of Bruner's thought, but young children can use correct grammar in speaking, but they can't tell you what the grammar rule is. But there's in being able to consistently, systematically use correct grammar demonstrates some structural understanding. The scientists constructing curricula in physics and mathematics have been highly mindful of the problem of teaching the structure of their subjects. And it may be that their early successes have been due to this emphasis. Their emphasis upon structure has stimulated students of the learning process. And now this is at the end of the introduction. He's going to talk about four themes, the four themes from this book. Four themes are developed in the chapters that follow. The first of these has already been introduced, the role of structure in learning and how it may be made central in teaching. The approach taken is a practical one. Students, perforce, have a limited exposure to the materials they are to learn. How can this exposure be made to count in their thinking for the rest of their lives? It's another one of these packed sentences. How can this exposure, so we have a limited exposure to the curriculum, to what they're going to learn. How can this exposure be made to count in their thinking for the rest of their lives? How can we leverage this the most? The dominant view among those who have been engaged in preparing and teaching new curricula is that the answer to this question lies in giving students an understanding of the fundamental structure of whatever subjects we choose to teach. Again, the answer to this question lies in giving students an understanding of the fundamental structure of whatever subjects we choose to teach. This is a minimum requirement for using knowledge, for bringing it to bear on problems and events one encounters outside a classroom, or in classrooms one enters later in one's training. The teaching and learning of structure, rather than simply the mastery of facts and techniques, is at the center of the classic problem of transfer. There are many things that go into learning of this kind, not the least of which are supporting habits and skills that make possible the active use of the materials one has come to understand. Here comes another packed sentence. If earlier learning is to render later learning easier, it must do so by providing a general picture in terms of which the relations between things encountered earlier and later are made as clear as possible. So you can think of a lot of different disciplines. We can go back to the example of the structure of the galaxy. If you have even a rough idea of the structure of the galaxy, that the sun is at the center and the planets are rotating around the sun, that helps you. If you have that accurate picture early on, then as you learn later, what you learn deepens your understanding and extends and broadens your understanding of that basic picture, instead of what we wouldn't want to do is to have your later understanding change that model, change that structure. That's what Bruner wants to avoid. You don't want to build on a faulty model, on a faulty structure that you're going to have to correct later. You want to build on an accurate model, a model that helps you efficiently understand how other variables, how other aspects relate, so that you can make sense of more and more things. Given the importance of this theme, much too little is known about how to teach fundamental structure effectively, or how to provide learning conditions that foster it. So the other themes are readiness to learn, the nature of intuition and motivations for learning. But in this introduction, I've just tried to pull out those passages that are especially related to the importance of structure for Jerome Bruner. So that is passages from the introduction in The Process of Education by Jerome Bruner, passages related to the importance of structure. And so now you should have a better sense for the importance of structure for Jerome Bruner.